Hello there. I'm going to talk a little bit today about the recent demo of Starship Troopers Terran Command, which has been released as part of the Steam Next Fest event, where a bunch of Steam demos have been released for upcoming games so that people can get hyped and interested and add games to their wish list. And I was interested in looking at Starcraft Terran Command because I'm quite a fan of the RTS genre. In particular, I like horde style RTSs where you have a lot of units and you can really feel like you're involved in really large battles. I find that those are some of the most cool and interesting type of RTSs. Games like Cossacks 3 or Planetary Annihilation, those type of games where you have huge number of units on the screen and you can often feel very epic. You have a lot of epic battles. So I was really interested in checking out the Starship Troopers RTS game. The trailer had looked interesting. People had been quite excited by it, but there was also a lot of reservations, a lot of concerns about whether there was going to be much depth to the experience. So I jumped into the demo. Demo's quite a small download, comprises of 3 single player missions that introduce you to a number of game mechanics building up. So I think they're obviously early levels within the campaign. So how does the game play? Well, as you can see, we've got kind of squad based RTS gameplay. That's kind of very basic RTS style where we have a very limited base building mechanic. You only have a few options for upgrades on specific zones. You don't build where you want to build. There are some small exceptions to that, but you tend to not have much building at all. You recruit your units via a supply system, so that's your resource. However, it only acts as a population cap. There are no resources for gathering. There are no resources for upgrades of specific units. All you have is a population cap, and that has benefits and also some drawbacks, which I'll come back to in a minute. You do have another resource, which is your war support, and that allows you to use some specific upgrades. In the demo, there's only one upgrade which uses this resource. Sorry, 2 upgrades that use this resource. There are the building upgrades, which allow you to create different squads of units, and there is a static MG defense or machine gun defense which you can build with the engineer unit. So there are no resource costs other than these 2 population cap style resources. So in terms of the actual combat, you have, as I mentioned, squads. You have a small number of units that you control within one click, so you don't have to control individual units. This is similar to games such as Dawn of War, Company of Heroes. And the game uses a line of sight mechanic, which is one of its main focuses for the game. And this basically means that you can maneuver your units, and you have to maneuver your units, otherwise they will not be able to fire through each other. So you can have units which are either fully obstructed, partially obstructed, or fully clear to shoot, and that will be denoted by a small green, yellow or red reticule underneath the main triangles above the squads. And you are trying to maneuver your units and position them in a way that all of your squads will be able to shoot and be able to get involved in the fight, otherwise they'll just be sitting there and be useless. And this is an interesting mechanic, and it really forces you in this game to think about positioning. It forces you to think about the terrain, forces you to think about elevation, choke points, different ways that you can manipulate your units to try and get yourself in a position where you can maximize the amount of firepower that you are putting down. In terms of the number of units in the demo, we see a small number of units that have slightly varying playstyles. We have the bog standard infantry. Those are your marines that just fire just streams of bullets at the bug enemies. You have your engineers. They have the flamethrowers. They're shorter range. They are very good at sticking in choke points, so they slow down the enemy enemy with the constant fire that they can produce from their flamethrowers. So they're good to stick in choke points so you can try and hold off the bugs while your infantrymen spray them down. And you have snipers, so the snipers are effective at killing the larger units. In this case there are only two types of enemies, the standard warrior bugs and some spitter bugs, and the snipers are particularly effective at taking out the long range spitter bugs. Then you have radio men. The radio men are mobile reinforcement points, so you can reinforce your squads as you do in Dawn of War of Company Heroes. However, it doesn't cost you anything, you just basically heal your squad up to full if you lose a couple of guys to bugs. This whole system is perhaps quite limited in scope. You of course are looking out for that terrain mechanic, you're looking out for the line of sight. However, the units themselves don't have too much variety. You've got a couple of special abilities, you've got grenades that you can use, and then the engineers can also build the MG turrets, as I mentioned earlier. They can only be built on specific points, basically hard surfaces denoted by kind of metal surfaces, so that limits your tactical availability of where you're using those. They're mostly used as static defense. Can feel a little limited in terms of what you can do, and I'll come back to the kind of limitations of what the game has, in my opinion. The type of levels that we have on show here are just a standard RTS style affair. So you have a couple of hold the line objectives, you have a couple of capture zone objectives, and a few escort missions that involve you kind of going into and taking out different areas of bugs, taking out some swarms of bugs and their respawn points. So it's a fairly standard affair. We can't really tell whether there's much more to it, although it is quite difficult to get much variety in those type of RTS games. In terms of graphics, it looks nice. It's very authentic to the movie in terms of art direction, so if you are a big fan of the movies, it is quite compelling to kind of be able to control the game and to be able to see visually how it would be like with the movie. So that's good. There are a lot of cool moments that are quite picturesque, quite movie-like, where you're holding off against hordes of bugs and you're just hoping that your front line doesn't start to die off as the bugs approach. And there are some fairly decent animations to go along with that, with the bugs dying from various ways and slicing up your squads if they get too close, and how you're trying to hold the line there. That's quite cool. So it is good in that department. However, there were a number of quite big concerns with regards to the game in general that I picked up on, which have me a little bit worried about the overall release of the game. Firstly, the AI for the player units is quite poor. Quite often your units will run towards the enemy very close, despite them being ranged units, which is absolutely crippling because the bugs are very effective in close range, and so when your units start running really close to them, they will start to be shredded up. And this has been quite obvious with the engineers, where they have a really deceptively long animation for their flamethrower, but they actually are a very short range unit. So you think that, oh, you know, I can kind of hold them at bay with the flamethrower, but in reality they start charging forward, they're really close, and then if they start to break through, your engineers just get wiped out. There's also an issue where sometimes when you're trying to move back units, they run forward before they move back. That's a big issue because once they are kind of locked in an animation of melee where they just get ripped apart, you will lose a lot of units very quickly, and it's a bit of a disaster. So that is a bit of a main problem. We also have a lot of issues with the line of sight mechanic, which is not good when it is the main mechanic of the game with regards to your kind of RTS style, your little extra thing other than the theme that you have going for the game, where a lot of the situation, it's not clear why your units aren't firing. There's sometimes gaps that are between your units that you think that some of your units can fire through, and yet they don't. The AI is very stupid. They sometimes don't shoot at units that are literally right beside them. They basically have a few issues with the terrain, where that sometimes units should be able to fire over terrain, or at least it looks like they should, but then they fail to do so, saying that there's no line of sight. So that's a little bit of an issue because it's hard to determine what your unit should be able to shoot over and what they shouldn't. There's also a big core fundamental issue that I've found, which I'm highlighting in this gameplay at the moment, which is I've been trying to take out this swarm of bugs where they keep spawning from this spawn point. And I had an experience trying to take over this one objective, of which there are 4 more that you have to do. I had a decent number of troops. I had a few troops back at the base which I had to hold in reserve because there were constant waves of guys attacking the main base. And then I was slowly pushing forward with these squads. I would try and do the classic tactic of having my engineers further forward. They would hold back the bugs, and then I would have my squads. And so I would gradually move forward and move forward and move forward. But the problem was that the spawn rate for the respawn point of the enemy bugs was so great that I would just constantly just keep pushing forward, losing a few guys, pushing forward, losing a few guys, pushing forward, losing a few guys, to the point where my guys would be wiped out. And then I would repeat it again. I have not lost anything other than time because there are no resources, so I just make all the guys again and I try again, moving them around in a slightly different way to try and get them to be able to shoot in a slightly different way through the angle. And then I would fail and some more guys would come and attack me from the side, and then I would move them forward, and then I would fail and all my guys would die, and then I would make them again and rinse and repeat. And it got very grindy. The whole idea of shooting tons of bugs and having this big battle where you're desperate to try and hold on to your units because these imposing creatures are taking them down and there's a big firefight and you're just holding them back at bay. All of that feeling was lost because I was just frustrated. I didn't know what I was doing wrong. I had used as many units as I could in this situation before I just got very frustrated, and I kept trying different tactics. And I did manage, after the 5th attempt, I managed to get some units up on a choke point looking over, and I managed to push forward and managed to kill just enough guys to be able to get in and destroy the respawn point. But it took me 15 minutes or so to complete this one objective in this mission in a way that felt very boring, where it was a bit of a grind. I was just constantly fighting these same guys, and I was constantly moving my guys. They would die and I'd have to remake them, and I'd try it again. And then the prospect of having to do that again for 3 more respawn points was daunting. And this could just be an issue with balance. I was playing on the medium difficulty. Maybe people won't have this kind of problem. Maybe I just wasn't very good at my positioning. But for me personally, I found that it really killed my interest in the demo because there wasn't really that drive. It was just a grind fest. Because there are only a limited number of unit types, because there's no base building, because there isn't much more to do other than move those troops around in the terrain, if you're stuck in the same bit, moving the same units on the same terrain for a prolonged period of time, it becomes grindy, it becomes boring. And I thought that really put me off what I expect the game to be like. I'm hoping that this was a one-off situation and maybe it was just me. But if you have any thoughts on the demo yourself, if you found that this final mission in particular was a grind to get through these spawners, whether it's just tweaking the respawn rate so that you're not constantly trying to push through, let me know. But otherwise, it was an interesting demo. It was definitely worth trying out, definitely worth playing. I thought that there were a lot of elements that are worth looking at, and it was quite fun for the majority of the time that I was playing it. But I do have a lot of concerns with regards to its longevity, whether more unit variety will fix that, whether more decent map variety and things and objective variety will fix it, I don't know. But we'll have to see on the main release. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you like this, please let me know. Anyway, thank you very much. Peace.
Put your fucking hands